Well, I'm glad to hear that people are knitting with it already. It is a nice, this is really nice, Border Leicester. I'll admit, Border Leicester sheep are popular here in Ohio for people that have sheep. And in through the spinning community here, and in going to like spinning guild meetings and where people bring um wool to sell. So they bring processed spinning wool to sell from their own flocks. I have had access to Border Leicester for many years, and the quality varies widely when you get it directly from farmers. So I I always thought that it was very useful for certain things, but it was never my very favorite fiber. Um, Only in the undyed form did I even like it at all. but but I did like it for, like I said, I made David several sweaters with it because it's so durable and it is nice and silky to spin. But but when people hand dye it, it changes a lot and it can get really like locked up. So hand spinning the dyed fiber is almost a completely different experience in my experience. And I'm not saying um the people who dyed it were especially expert, but I don't know. It's just something I always felt like, oh, I don't know if this is going to be a barn box option. It's real iffy, you know. But then one of our mills showed us yarn and fiber from a New England farm that they'd been processing, and it was really beautiful. And that's this. I believe it's the same farm that produces our Fin 3-ply, the fiber for our Fin Dandy 3-ply. So if that tells you of the kind of attention to fiber and the quality of animal that they're raising, fiber animal that they're raising, this comes from them, and it's really beautiful. Um, the sheen on it is just gorgeous, and it really has been spun up really nice and evenly. There are very few slubs in it or uneven. I'm not getting like a lot of uneven fabric. If I can hold this up again and show you the stockinette stitch that's on my needles, it's really not, it doesn't show any rivering or any thin spots of note that would concern me in terms of durability.
What is rivering?
Where the, with a 2-ply yarn, you get, it's just natural to get thick and thin areas in the yarn. And
Okay.
so sometimes you'll get some rivering where there's a stretch of fiber, a stretch of yarn that's gotten really thin and then it gets heavy again. And so you get some horizontal lines in the fabric from that. And I, I didn't really experience that with this yarn. Um, so anyway, I was very pleased with the product, and like I said, it's the first mill spun Border Leicester that I've had access to, and I really like it. So the Border Leicester sheep are the largest indigenous breed in the British Islands, and they're popular as a show animal because of their attractive characteristics and elegant presence. They are a polled, meaning hornless, long wool sheep, considered to be dual purpose as they are reared both for meat and wool. And I would say, I don't know where this falls in the purpose category, but um, Leicester sheep overall are heavily used in the industry to sire mule sheep. So they're used to produce breeding stock with ewes of other breeds. And that's absolutely a money making product within the industry. So I'm not sure where that falls in the whether that's considered part of the meat production process or what. The Leicester family encompasses many breeds of wool. There are the blue-faced Leicesters, the Border Leicesters, the British, just the Leicesters, and Massams and Wensleydales, all can attribute their lineage to the Leicester family of wools. And so the bloodlines of this breed, as well as other Leicester breeds, go back all the way to the 1700s. Just so you understand that the genetics here and the genetics in the appearance of the animal are several centuries in the making. As a pedigree animal, Border Leicester lends itself to all farming systems, so it can be farmed commercially or in a small holding, commercially producing large quantities of half-bred females, those are the mule sheep I was talking about, to sell as breeding stock for replacement stock within the herd, or producing butcher lambs and, of course, wool. The wool being the least productive in terms of financial gain and probably the least concern among breeders, of large-scale breeders especially. The versatility of the animal allows any size farm to market a quality product. And again, the lineage is so long that genetics have been, improved many, many times along the way and diversified enough to keep the genetics in top form for producing quality animals with very little mutation or waste, and very little inbreeding necessary. The Border Leicester has a regal, alert appearance. Let me get some pictures out here. Let's see. This is a sheared sheep, but this is the body. Well, let me show you the head, since we're going to talk about that first. So that's the profile of the Border Leicester, the regal Roman nosed Border Leicester sheep. They have the head and legs are free of wool. They have the arched Roman nose, and this one is particularly, it almost looks like a Trojan horse, the way the head is shaped. It's fairly short, and as the breed, and I'll just put this out ahead of time, but we'll talk about it later. As the breed has been disseminated around the world, genetics have changed a bit too, and in different parts of the world, they exhibit slightly different head conformation and ear shapes. So just so you know that. I'm gonna stop that. Okay, go back to my gallery view for some reason. Okay. They have long erect ears, and when I say that, I mean like they're commonly called like the bunny sheep or the rabbit sheep, rabbit ears. And I'll show you some pictures of that. This is a side view of the entire animal. So you can see its body shape there. They are quite a large sheep, but unlike the Lincoln Longwool or the Wensleydale, they're not like a huge squared off block of a sheep. They do have a nice, very long body that allows for a little more tapering. And this sheep has been shorn very recently, so you can really see the musculature and the shape of the legs and the upright ears. And now I'm gonna show you another picture where you can see the ears kind of head on. So There you go. Those are the famous upright ears. And sometimes they can, again, the genetics of more contemporary times have brought about the pattern of spotting around the ears that is a little more common nowadays. And you can see that its coat is a bit fluffy here. So this one has a little bit more grown out coat, but definitely not at its longest. So this coat is probably somewhere between 2 to 3 inches in length. The Border Leicesters are generally calm and easy to handle, while at the same time alert and aware of their surroundings. They have, even the Rams display a surprisingly pleasant and gentlemanly disposition. I just love, I get a lot of information from the organizations that develop around the animals, the breed associations, and they're so in love with their breeds. They get so poetic about in the way that they talk about their favorite sheep, their breeds. So I always enjoy kind of borrowing some of the phrasing from them because it's just kind of lovely and entertaining too. So Border Leicesters are hardy, well-muscled with long bodies, like I showed you, much longer than other sheep breeds, and with well-developed brisket area, which is the frontal part of the chest, the part that faces front. The brisket is the bridge between the two legs, is right there. They have well-developed chest, brisket, and ribs, and a strong, wide back. Mature rams range from 309 to 386 pounds and use between 200 and 260 pounds, and yearlings reach a weight of about 140 pounds. Normally, they're shorn twice a year when the wool reaches a length of about between 3 to 4 inches, which is ideal for spinning, for mill spinning. Any longer than that, and the mills start to have difficulty with the wool being a little too long. But you can grow out your fleece to the yearly length of 8 to 12 inches in order to sell it as a hand spinning product. So I've spun both long locks or long wool and the shorter wool, and it's just a different kind of experience if you're a hand spinner. And if you haven't done that before, there are many producers of Border Leicester, Blue-Faced Leicester, Wensleydale fleece that do sell the long fiber for hand spinning. And if you haven't tried that before, it's really kind of fun to try both. So a little tangent there. Lambs yield an average of 4 pounds of wool, and that's an important point because being on the coarser side of medium, the micron diameter being 30 to 38 microns in the adult fiber. So being on the coarser side of medium, the lamb's wool is a really good product to use for spinning yarn. It's definitely going to land on the lower end of the micron scale, and it's going to be lighter and finer to work with. Let's see. So lambs yield an average of 4 pounds of wool, which is really pretty good for a lamb. Many of the other breeds that we've studied are more in the range of 2.5 to 3 pounds. So that's quite a bit. And with a lot of Border Leicester lambs going to market for meat, there's definitely an opportunity there to bring lamb's wool to the fiber market. Let's see. The the flocks that are raised outside of the UK, in the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and other parts of the world, rarely, one of the differences between those populations of the sheep and those producers versus the UK producers is that they don't go to the extreme weight. They don't try to achieve those extreme weights that you see in the UK. I The reasoning for that wasn't clear, but I think it's just because in other places there are lots more large scale um, sheep production sites that require moving animals through the cycle a little bit faster. And so they don't stick around long enough to get really huge size or to produce super long wool. It's just not the focus of those kind of producers. Border Leicesters produce very good high quality and high quantity of milk for their lambs, and they're very good mothers with a lambing percentage of about 150%. So very productive. They're prolific, excellent mothers, and they are good. The breed is good at foraging, so they can be out in the pasture, not only eating grass, but getting really good nourishment from other types of vegetation that are out there, and keeping some of the pasture management tasks within the flock instead of relying on the farmer to do that. So their bodies just naturally and through good genetics make the most out of less food and less good quality food than other breeds might require, while still producing good meat, good milk, and good lambs. The lambs are active and vigorous right away from birth. They grow very rapidly for the first 4 months and continue to grow for several years if they are kept in the flock. Border Leicester lambs that are fed for the market, so for maximum weight gain, can often reach 110 pounds by 4.5 months of age, which is, half the size of their mothers by then. Good thing our kids don't grow that fast. And producers who choose to grow out lambs a little more slowly can shear 2 to 3 pounds of skirted hand spinning wool before the first year is up. With their stylish heads and curly fleeces, Border Leicesters quickly capture attention in the show ring. They are typically shown with 3 to 5 months of wool on their bodies. So the fleece, which is one of the most important judging characteristics, can be accurately evaluated. So even though the wool isn't highly valued or a productive or an important product, it is in judging circles. It is an important characteristic to judge the quality of the animal by, which makes kind of good sense. The wool is a reflection not only of how long it can get or how big the fleece is, but the quality of the food and the quality of the environment that the animal is raised in and how well taken care of it is, and its genetics. And all of that is important because so many of these animals are valuable for either insemination or for selling off as sires or for hiring out as sires. So farmers can make money if their animals are judged highly. They can make money just sending their rams to another farm for breeding, and the fees for that can be, pretty good income. For exhibition, they should appear clean and neat, but never shampooed. This would remove the natural oil from the wool and kind of render it unjudgeable. A light spritzing of lukewarm water is is often applied a few hours before the show ring to bring out the natural, basically to raise the fiber up and release the curl back into the fiber. And then the animal is allowed to dry completely in that state without ruffling or combing its fleece before it goes into the show ring. So stray locks may be trimmed, but the Border Leicester should not be combed for competition. just in case you're thinking about it. That would disturb the natural lock formation and detract from the character of the fleece. So in smaller farming concerns and small holdings, Border Leicester sheep are often kept for the wool, which grows long and lustrous with a micron count of 30 to 38. The ideal fleece falls in well-defined pencil locks with pearled tips ending in a small curl. And pearl tips means that, so the lock is spiraled and it's a very thin, like, pinky finger thin lock. And then at the very end, it goes into a little up and down wave ending in a little curl. And I have pictures of locks, but I can't remember now. Let me just see if these are carded locks or shampoo, or I'm sorry, washed. So that's kind of the length of it. And that's, once it's washed, you can see that it's very fluffy. I would say the top one is lamb's wool. You can see that that's quite fine and fluffy. And you can see down below that the more mature lock is, the fiber coming out of it is a little more wiry and thicker. There's really quite a difference between them when you look at it that way. Okay. Let's see. So the locks can measure between 8 to 12 inches after a year. It's long enough that it can be sheared once a year or twice a year, depending on, the preferences of the producer and the market that they're serving. They are easy to shear sheep because they have the clean legs and head, and also their docile nature enables them to be sheared rather easily. So twice a year shearing isn't a big deal. Use average 8 to 12 pounds of grease wool annually, and fleeces often yield 70% or even slightly higher clean wool after scouring. And that's one of the highest yielding types of wool that you can find. The natural fleece colors range from almost black. I'm going to bring up a picture here because they are so pretty. There we go. There you go. So almost black to chocolate brown, rose gray, dark silver, light silver, and white. And some of them even might have like piebald or spotted fleeces. Others have unique markings, like I said, the spotted ears. You can see back in the crowd there near the back, there's a silver sheep with a dark charcoal kind of stripe down its back. That's kind of cool. So there's quite a bit of variation. And our wool is probably closest, it's a dark gray, but when you see the variation throughout the fleece of, say, that gray animal, you can see where we got the name rainbow gray for our colorway. Actually, our employee Becky, who does all the yarn intake and puts the labels on and packs your barn box packages and rolls them up in tissue paper. Um, she actually is the one who said, "This is like a rainbow gray," and she does talk like that. And I was like, "Great, well, that's what we'll name it, Rainbow Gray," because in her area she has some natural light coming in, and when she holds it up to the light, she can see all the different shades of black, gray, brown, and some gold in there, and she just really fell in love with the color. So history and genetics. Any questions about the actual sheep themselves or the wool? Anybody have anything to say? Janet?
So the wool that we've received, was this lamb's wool or was this fully grown sheep?
I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing it's either yearling, which is yearlings are still considered lambs, but they call them yearlings. They're a year old. And I don't know if it's when we say lamb's wool or kid, that's usually means that they've only been shorn the one time. So the tip of that fiber is rounded rather than angled like you would get with a second shave. So I don't know the answer to that. Long story short, I have a feeling this is either lamb's wool yearling or a mix of the two because of the fineness of it. You know, when I pull out fibers, they're not as coarse as I have seen Border Leicester be.
Okay.
So it's either very, very fine adult fiber or it's yearling kid or yearling. I say kid, that's usually a term reserved for goats, but lamb's wool or yearling.
Okay.
It is nice and shiny too.
Mhm.
Okay. History, genetics, and dissemination. So the Border Leicester is a breed in, while it is really, really old, it's a breed whose origins are have no doubt. It they are lineal descendants of the Dishley Leicester breed made famous by Robert Bakewell of Dishley, Leicestershire. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because it has come up in several other breeds that we studied. The Blueface Leicester, the Wensleydale, the Massam breed are just a few that off the top of my head. It his his abilities as a livestock breeder completely revolutionized breeding in the UK at the time. And so people came from all over the United Kingdom to study with him and Europe to study with him and to buy his lambs and or to hire his rams for studying. So and I'll get into his what makes him so special as a breeder in a second, but his a lot of different British breeds link back to the Dishley Leicester. Sheep with long, lustrous wool have been raised in Leicestershire, England, since the earliest recorded history of the British Isles. And they're responsible for the improvement and development of other long wool breeds. Now, you might remember, or some of you might remember, when we talked about, for instance, the Gotlands or the Icelandics, that was pretty far back, and even the Shetland breeds, they come from this Northern European group of sheep called the short tail breeds that are kind of native to cold climates in the north of Europe. And because they in centuries past were raised in very isolated areas, developed their own unique characteristics. And those sheep, those northern breeds, have influenced a lot of the breeds that come after them, and their kind of genetic characteristics get carried down through other breeds. that's kind of opposed to like modern breeds that are developed nowadays, which are very carefully genetically selected and bred for very particular characteristics to serve a commercial market. These old heritage and primitive breeds weren't bred for, you know, if something good happened, it was mostly accidental. And maybe a farmer could be astute enough to capitalize on that by recognizing that, for instance, in the case of the Gotlands, the the widely accepted knowledge of how Gotlands came about was that farmers just always bred and rebred the very best specimens that they had. And they didn't play around with trying to make better on sheep that were not up to snuff. They just ate them or passed them on to others. And the Leicester breeds are in that are raised in in the north of the UK are kind of similar to that in that philosophy. The in fact, in this case, all different kind of types of Leicester sheep were run together. They bred at random, resulting in many different breeds within their own kind of larger family, but each with their own unique and kind of random traits. One of the things that was common at that time was to butcher the youngest, kind of slowest, the more quickly developing lambs, and to save the more slowly maturing lambs for breeding. And this is where Bakewell steps in. So he challenged that common practice of slaughtering the early maturing stock while keeping the slower maturing ones to breed from. His philosophy was the 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 more quickly a lamb matures and becomes bigger and more vigorous, you know, there must be something positive about that lamb. You know, it's got more energy, it uses its food better, it gets bigger more quickly. Like those might be characteristics I might want in future flocks. So he kind of reversed that whole thing. He waited on his slower maturing stock and sent those to market a little bit later, but that way getting rid of and culling those the slow sheep out of the herd and keeping the more vigorous, vital, quickly growing sheep. And then he bred those with each other. So his strategy, just that alone, had a profound impact on his own stock, on his own livestock breeding, and on the economy that he gained through increased production. So the faster you can get a lamb to the point where they can breed, the better you can, you know, eventually produce more lambs that way. And his fame and prestige as an innovative breeder drew the interest of enthusiastic other breeders who wanted to learn his methods. So some of the things he did was he segregated the sexes within his flock. He allowed mating to occur only in a deliberate and specific strategy. He developed a system of breeding that he called in and in, or what today is called line breeding, where you're breeding together sheep from the same parents. You're kind of inbreeding them a bit for a generation or two to amplify the good traits that you want. So he developed that line breeding, and by breeding animals of close relationship with each other. He didn't write anything down because he was very secretive, but it is thought that he started with a Lincolnshire breed of sheep, and crossing those with the best of the local Leicester types, and then culling and coupling rigorously until he could fix desirable traits for improved meat quality and production through potency. This resulted in a new breed that he called the New Leicester, or the Dish, and became to be known as the Dishley Leicester, because he was located in the town of Dishley. So this whole kind of revolutionary breeding strategy was wildly popular, and people came from all over the place to look at his sheep and to watch his methods and kind of learn from him, and to take his to buy sheep and take them back to their own flocks, or to even move their holdings to be close enough to his area to do farm visits with sheep for siring. And in that way, the Dishley blood found its way north out of Dishley, out of Leicester, to the border counties of Leicester. And in 1767, the Cully brothers, George and Matthew, settled in the Glendale district of Northumberland as tenant farmers with some of Bakewell's flock. So they went to Bakewell in the 1750s. They studied with him. They learned his methods, and then bought some of his lambs and brought them to the Northumberland area, which is all the way up north in the border counties of Leicester, where they settled into a tenant farm to raise their own sheep. After some extensive traveling and looking around, this is what they decided on. And their names also come up time and again in other breeds that we've studied. I believe that they traveled to Australia and New Zealand and really made their way around in terms of studying and learning about the sheep trade. So once they got settled where they were, they soon attracted interest by other farmers in their area on both sides of the border between the UK and Scotland. So they're in the upper counties of Leicester, which border on Scotland, and they're drawing a lot of interest to their little small holding of Dishley Leicesters. So after Bakewell died, he died in 1795, down in Dishley, some of his neighbors formed a club with the object of maintaining the purity of his Dishley sheep. And many of the new flocks of Dishley Leicesters were established all throughout that part of the United Kingdom, and soon followed by several other farmers in Northumberland and the southeastern counties of Scotland. So while Dishley Leicesters were kind of propagating around the border area, those breeders were still traveling south to Dishley to buy breeding rams until about 1830. And then at that time, the northern sheep were starting to evolve into a separate breed. So they were separating some of the characteristics out, and mainly into two different types. So the Cully brothers continued crossing their sheep with the local Teeswater breed, which is another breed that we've talked about in relationship to the Massam breed. So they're crossing their Dishley Leicesters with Teeswater breed, but other farmers were crossing their Dishleys with Cheviot breed. And Cheviots have a very similar Roman nose. They're an all white wool, but the Teeswaters are a little bit different and can come in colors, and their ears are a little different. So that led to two variations of the northern Dishley Leicesters that were nicknamed the blue caps and the red legs. The border farmers preferring the hardier red leg version. The red legs were the Teeswater crosses, and the blue caps were the Cheviot crosses, just to be clear which was which. And guess what sheep eventually was propagated from the blue caps? Can anybody guess?
BFL.
BFL, right? The blue-faced Leicester. So, it's all incestuous and tied together at its roots. But the redlegs were the preferred sheep of the northern counties, and their genetics significantly more common today in the northern Leicester breeds than as it was the preferred variant back in the 1800s. Okay. As the changes in type became more apparent, there was a lot of discussion about whether they were still true Bakewell Leicesters. And by the 1850s, the practice of using actual Dishley Leicester rams for breeding had all but stopped. And so this variation of the Dishley Leicester began to be known as the Border Leicester. And that's where we get to where we are in Barn Box today. Records show that the Highland and Agricultural Society provided classification for both Dishley Leicesters and Border Leicesters from 1869 to 1881, but after 1801 only for Border Leicesters. So, which means that in the Highland areas, the Dishley Leicester was all but, kind of put aside in favor of the Border Leicester and the, blue-faced Leicester also. And one of the reasons for that is that taste in meat also changed. So the Dishley Leicester, previously had been valued for its kind of fatty, marbled meat, but that quality passed out of favor for a leaner, milder tasting meat. And so, and you might remember this from other discussions, Dishley Leicesters all but disappeared at one point, although they're back. They are part of a conservancy program. So the Leicester breed, as of now, is not endangered in any way. It's on a vulnerable list, but has a growing popularity, and in more places. So that helps. Registered flocks of Border Leicesters are now found in all parts of England, Ireland, Scotland, and Wales. They've been exported widely. They were exported widely pretty much as soon as refrigerated shipping became available in the 1880s. These sheep began to be exported to all kinds of places where that were raising great volumes of sheep for meat. And so as soon as meat could be sent around the world in refrigerated ships, then sheep production increased along with that need. And in places like Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, as well as France, Spain, Canada, the United States, Colombia, British Guiana, India, Japan, Yugoslavia, Iran, Hungary, Russia, China, Turkey, and Switzerland. So we're talking about everywhere. And I'm just going to talk about a few of those places that have had a little more influence on the breed overall. So the breed was was the earliest exportations really went to New Zealand in 1859. And then, like I said, after refrigeration was introduced in the 1880s, allowing meat to be shipped worldwide, the Border Leicester was used as a crossing sire there to produce heavyweight lambs and wether mutton. Excuse me. And then later, and you might remember this also from other discussions of completely different sheep. In New Zealand, the Border Leicester is introduced, the genetics of the Border Leicester were introduced to create the New Zealand's Border Romney cross, which is the Coopworth sheep, and the Border Corriedale or Borderdale breeds. And I believe it plays a role in Polworth as well, especially in the colored Polworth production. It was they kind of fooled around with crossing Merinos and Romneys, and that didn't work. And they finally went to Merinos and Border Leicesters for the Polworth genetics, and they finally hit the jackpot with that in terms of getting exactly what they wanted with that breed. Once the breed was established in New Zealand, then the Australian producers had much closer access to it. So, but its impact on Australian sheep industry has been geometric compared to New Zealand. Border Leicester rams were used for mating with Merino ewes in Australia to breed the first cross mothers or mules, so valuable for producing prime lambs. Border Leicester sheep also contribute about 50% of the genetics used in the Growmark breed of sheep that were also developed in Australia. Over many years, the Border Leicester has risen to be the #1 maternal breed in Australia. First cross Border Merino ewes are highly sought after for their ability to produce large numbers of quality lambs over a wide range of climatic conditions. Through a mix of new and traditional methods, breeders will continue to keep the breed an important part of the lamb industry. And just to give you an idea, I mean, a really good Border Leicester ram that's ready to sire are often sold at around anywhere from like $4,000 to $5,500 a piece, which if you're running a large concern, that's pretty expensive. And use range between like $800 and $1,200. So you're just raising Border Leicester sheep for breeding purposes can be a very lucrative business in and of itself. Although most many producers are more diversified than that. You never can bank on just having your eggs in one basket or your wool in one basket. J.C. Cochrane established the first significant Border Leicester stud in Victoria, Australia in 1881. And then a Mr. Landale of New South Wales imported 330 stud ewes and 10 stud rams from New Zealand in 1895. Over the next 20 years, Australian studs were established with New Zealand Border Leicesters, and breeders continued to import sheep as well from Scotland to maintain the breed's character and style. The popularity of the Border Leicester continues to grow as breeders adapted them to fit their new environment. There was much discussion about which was the better type, the native British Border Leicesters or the adapted type. Slight differences in appearance emerged, such as the shorter, less erect ears. I'm going to just show you that. and as well like a just a overall smaller body. So again, this is the Border Leicester. This is the original looking Border Leicester. You can see those, the ears are almost as long. They look like they're almost as long as the head itself. And the ears have a clear white and pink coloring. There are no spots there. The head and eye area is free of markings, etc. You can also see the nice fleece. It's parted down the back and it's beginning to fall into little pencil locks that are highly crimped. So it looks beautiful. This is like when we were talking about a sheep ready for the show ring. This is everything you want it to look like when you bring it into the show ring. And then this, I'm gonna they're so fun looking. And then this is the more modern, I guess, or the adapted Border Leicester sheep. You can see the ears are a little bit lowered and they're much smaller, not quite as high, and they're marked. And of course, the coloring. So crossing these sheep with merino mothers is going to bring merino color into the flock. And that's, and there's a bit of a movement throughout Australia and New Zealand to give some credence to the, a market for colored fiber, to the extent that all white flocks are really not as profitable anymore as mixed and all color flocks of certain sheep. So it is desirable now to have some colored wool, and so lots of producers are cultivating that within their flocks. All right, so the popularity in Australia of the Border Leicester continued to grow as breeders adapted them to fit the new environment, which is, Australia, the climate in Australia is very different. The climate and the terrain in Australia is very different than in the UK, which is one of the reasons that they have developed so many new breeds down there, is that running only merinos for so long depleted a lot of the pasture land that naturally occurred there, and they had to make changes to accommodate that. And some of their weather can be very extreme. It gets extremely hot, and it can get extremely wind whipped and cold at times, in the winter, in the off season. By 1960, there were over 1,100 stud flocks comprising more than 500,000 Border Leicester sheep and lambs in Australia. And, that continues to fluctuate, grow and change with the needs of the rest of the world. And then America, the English Leicester, the original English Leicester, and the Dishley Leicester is said to have been introduced into the United States by George Washington, who kept a small purebred flock of Leicesters and used the rams extensively in his flock of 800 sheep at Mount Vernon. It isn't really known when the first Border Leicester type was brought in to North America, but the 1920 census lists just a little less than 800 purebred Border Leicesters in the USA at that time. And, that was only 100 years ago. The popularity of this sheep it is a popular sheep here in America. And by 1973, the United States had its own Border Leicester Association. And the different Leicester, if you Google Leicester sheep or Border Leicester sheep or Dishley Leicester sheep or Blueface Leicester sheep, you're going to find a lot of different Leicester sheep organizations, and they're all really, really interesting to read from. The original English Leicester um, society page is has really beautiful old photographs and very interesting information about that breed. And I didn't want to go off on a tangent and present all that, but it is really interesting information. And that is the part of the Leicester family that almost fell into extinction because it just wasn't wanted anymore. The wool and the meat and the vagaries of the animal itself just fell out of favor and wasn't and became unprofitable to raise unless you just wanted sheep to look at. To the point where when I think it's at Colonial Williamsburg, they have a very small fledgling flock of English Leicester sheep. They ran into issues when they wanted to kind of grow their flock. They couldn't find a true Leicester sire to husband, to breed new Leicester sheep here in the United States. And they had one that I think they got it from Canada. They had it for years down there, and then someone murdered it, which is just gruesome. And why? Someone murdered the only existing true English Leicester sheep at Williamsburg, and the outpouring of and it kind of this is horrible, but it gained national attention in the news because it's just a gruesome, disgusting thing to do. And the news cycle was such that it hit, the papers and the news, and it caused such an outpouring of sympathy and support for the organization that owned this sheep. And I forget his name right now. He had a name. Even from some small, they even got grants from some, organizations and historical societies and such. It enabled them to send to New Zealand for a new sire. So they were able to actually import a true Leicester wool sheep from New Zealand back to the United States to start all over again. And over the years, it has enabled them to grow a small flock at Colonial Williamsburg. So a really horrible, gruesome thing ended up producing a good thing, which is a good thing, I guess. By 1973, we had our own Border Leicester Association here. And in the United States, the ABLA allows both white and colored Border Leicesters to be eligible for registry. The natural color sheep are identified with a letter B at the end of their registration number, and the white sheep with at least one natural colored ancestor are identified with an F in their registration number, standing for factored. And that system is designed to help people raising Leicester or Border Leicesters and colored Border Leicesters specifically to locate the breeding stock that will get them the results that they're hoping for in terms of the color genetics working out with the sheep that they already have. Okay, so that brings us up to, pretty much the current day and all about as much as I could really glean and condense about the breed. So questions or comments? Anybody? Go. Sheila.
Hi, very interesting. Thanks a lot for this, Anne. I'm curious, when you were talking about Dishley back in the day and how he sired, can you explain or give me an idea of how many generations he would do to say, okay, that's the trait that I want to get, and I'm going to move forward with that? How do they figure that out?
Well, his name was Bakewell, and he was in Dishley. So Dishley is a place,
Oh,
and Bakewell is no. I'm just, I just someone's
accuracy is
gonna
important.
someone's gonna say it. So with such fast growing lambs and early maturation rates, you can quickly create a new set of genetics. Now, again, he was very secretive and didn't write anything down. I mean, literally, there's nothing. He did not keep records public. He did not keep records that were made public ever. So he was very capricious that way, and thought a lot of his methods, and was very worried about people stealing them. And he was making a lot of money by being the only person to get the genetics from. So, he had good reasons, I guess. But what we know about sheep breeding is that you can generate a distinct breed within 4 to 5 generations. Some breeds take longer. I think the quickest we have studied in this group was it was in Australia. I'm sorry, it was in New Zealand, and it was 25 years from starting at 0 to a breed that could be distinctly named with a distinct name. And I can't remember which one it was now. It wasn't as far back as Polworth. It was one of the ones we did earlier this year or at the end of last year, and it may come to me. So you can get a new set of genetics in as early as 4 to 5 generations, which is about a decade of breeding time. But to actually have the genetics that reliably give you the consistent results you want, it would normally take 20 to 25 years minimum to get that. And many breeds take 40 to 50 years to get to that point. The newer, more modern methods are generating new breeds. Kathy, I don't think it was Polypay, because that was produced in the United States, and I'm thinking of oh, you know what? You are right. It wasn't. I'm remembering the place wrong. It was Polypay, and that was in the United States and not in New Zealand. Thank you. You're right. So, and it also depends on your methods. So the more strict and rigorous you are about keeping your methods going, the more reliably you can replicate the results over time. And so that'll lead to a faster, generation of what you're looking for, of the end result. And you see that, like, you can see that in some of the ones we studied where there was particular specific attention to producing colored sheep alongside white flocks, that with very rigorous culling and breeding, you can get a new colored flock within 10 to 20 years that, is obvious. Like, the results are obvious by the color that what you're doing right and what you're not doing right. And it's easy to get there. Now with the Dishley Leicester, some of the results are obvious when you're just going for better meat and better conformity and better wool. The judging of the results is going to take a little more time. So it's not just a matter of what you can see, but what bears out over the course of the sheep's lifetime, of the results of butchering it, the results of shearing it and working with the wool and tasting the meat, etc. So some of those aspects take time to make the right judgments. Either that or you're going to be eating a lot of that meat and spinning a lot of that wool over the winter between one crop and another.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope that made sense. I tend to
It
ramble.
did.
There's so many factors, it's never a clear-cut answer. Anybody else have a question or a comment?
How long do they live?
That's a good question. I did not run across that information. But the fact that they continue to grow for several years and they don't reach their full size necessarily until they're 3 or 4 years old leads me to believe that they grow pretty old. I think most sheep will hit the upper limits of their lifespan by age 6 or 7, if I'm not mistaken. Some sheep live longer, like the Massam sheep that we studied last time has frequently have a 10-year life cycle and can produce lambs still at 7 or 8 years old. So the genetics in those Leicester family breeds are very good for longevity, and I imagine Border Leicesters to be similar. And that adds to their productivity because you don't have to replace your sheep every 6 or 7 years. You can go 8 to 10 years instead, and it matters. Anyone else?
If I have another question, if nobody else has
Okay.
So rainbow gray. If somebody wanted to get more skeins of this, the likelihood that they would match is kind of low if your person noticed the variation in just this lot. So
I think I think the blending is really good. I think what she was referring to is that when you hold it up to the light within it, you can see the influence. In some light it has almost a gold cast, and in other light it's you can see the rich charcoal colors.
So within each skein she saw a rainbow.
Yeah.
Not like a rainbow like it's striped, but that it like
Yeah.
what do you call it? When something
Tonal?
No, when something has that glaze, Susan knows what I'm talking about. That multicolored glaze that you see on ceramics. Sometimes it's like a sheer multicolor. The word effervescent keeps coming to my lips, and that's the wrong word.
Okay.
But iridescent.
Oh,
Yeah. So it almost has an iridescence to the colorway. Opalescent is another good one. Yep. Where the blending is very good, but what is blended in here is a range of fleece colors, and because of the sheen and all the different colors that are in the color mix, it has almost an iridescence that made her think of rainbow glazes on. So
I misunderstood, Anne. I thought you said that
that's
in
okay.
between the skeins, but thanks for clarifying.
No,
I really
that's
like this yarn.
Yeah, no, she meant within the plies itself. Now, that said, it is a heathery, it does play out as a heathery, you can see variations in dark and light and kind of almost like a tweedy or almost like a marled yarn. So there are differences that occur, and it's possible that from skein to skein you might see you might see where you change skeins. I haven't found that to be the case in the knitting that I've done with it, so you can take that as you might. if it doesn't bother you to have slight variations from one skein to another, then you wouldn't need to alternate skeins. But if it really, really bugs you to have it, then I would recommend alternating skeins just because of the heathering that occurs in the yarn. Now I designed, and this predates the Sockathon idea. But when we were picking yarn for this year for Barn Box, when we were doing this last year, I thought it would be nice to have the Border Leicester in the summertime so that it could be a sock project. And that is before the sock knit along was a twinkle in Michelle's eye. So it just worked out that it fit in with our Sockathon summer knit along. So because it's a durable long wool fiber, which for those who haven't heard those words before, long wool is just what it sounds like. It's fleece that can grow longer. It typically is a little coarser than something like merino or Polworth or Targhee, and it's usually a lustrous. The long wools tend to have more luster in their fiber, and they tend to be very durable, so they're great for items that of outerwear and home goods and things that are that need to stand up to harder wear. And so I designed socks, these pretty cabled socks. This is what they look like in a side view. So they have a little cable down the side and then a larger cable along the leg and foot with some moss stitch on either side. And the cable goes all the way down to the bottom of the heel here. Oh. And they're just a nice rugged sock. I modeled them in the pictures, and it was over 90 degrees the evening we went out to do this. And they were just very comfortable. I mean, they don't feel heavy. One thing about Border Leicester that I ran into in hand spinning it is that the yarn can feel heavy. And this yarn actually doesn't. It does have a nice light feeling. Now, knit into socks on size 1 DPNs, it's definitely dense and heavy, but no more than other socks that we've knit this summer. So I named them Northumberland after the birthplace of the Border Leicester breed, and with the imagination that these would be socks that would be maybe attractive for a sheep herder up there to wear. And the pattern includes, I think, 2 sizes, a small and a large, but you can alter the sizing by using different needle sizes too. I would not recommend going up in needle size, but going down instead. So to make a smaller sock, you would use a tighter gauge. To make the in-between size between the small and the large, you would knit the large on smaller needles, and that would give you kind of an in-between size. Usually I try to provide more sizes than that in a pattern, but I was a little bit constrained by the design here from doing that. So anybody else have questions about the design or any patterns they might be thinking about doing? Or
you just took my questions away from me, and I was going to ask you what you thought a yarn of this structure would be good for, and you've answered it very well. Thank you.
Yeah, and we did pick a little collection. You're welcome to download any pattern with your Barn Box subscription, but every shipment we we showcase a selection of patterns that I think would be especially nice in the yarn. So there's always a couple of sweaters, some wraps. Like I think the hypotenuse wrap would be so cool in this yarn. As a nice winter wrap.
But it,
Or
but it
a
helps,
light blanket size in that pattern would be nice. Go ahead, Julia.
but it helps me when you were describing that it's good for something more of a rougher wear, like the socks or something,
Yeah, I
as
mean,
opposed to a nice fine sweater, a fine sweater
yeah,
and things. So your description helped
I mean,
clarify some differences.
I'm knitting a fine sweater with it, but I'm knitting it for someone who doesn't care what that feels like. I mean, David just isn't sensitive and he'll wear, in fact, I think he likes his rustic fibers better than
Yeah.
anything that's too soft.
Yeah.
But people make saddle blankets with it. That's one of the things that was mentioned as, things that are produced in the UK with Border Leicester. It is because it's a long wool, it tends to have a little more drape than say merino. So it doesn't have like that really squishy snap back to original recovery that merino or Polworth or Targhee or even our Stone Soup blend might have. But it does make for a really elegant sweep if you want to make something with a lapel that drapes and you want that lapel to always hang nicely. It's going to work really well for something like that. Or it's got a really similar hand to the Massam yarn that we got last time. So these two together in a project could be interesting. Or I'm trying to think what other, or if you still have your British Jacob yarn, that was a fingering weight as well, I think, or a light sport weight, and it would also pair nicely with this for a color work project. And being so dark, it would definitely contrast enough with this.
True. Yeah, I love the British Jacob.
I mean, you could use it in a Haplander project as well with other leftover bits and pieces you might have. Anybody else have a question or want to say anything?
Thank you for addressing that business about how durable it is, because I was wondering about that for a sock, because the only all wool sock yarns I knit with tend to be they're spun, the commercial ones are spun really, really tight, and they're a pain to knit with because they worm like crazy because they're so tightly spun, to sort of make up for the lack of nylon and make them more abrasion resistant.
Right.
And I was really tempted to do those socks, but then I looked at it and I thought, God, I just don't know. It's not spun very tight, but the length of the fiber makes up for that.
Yeah, and it actually does have a pretty good twist on it for a long wool. I think it's going to be pretty durable.
I may have to get another skein or pull apart this shawl or something.
What are you knitting with it?
I'm doing Magnolia Plaza.
Oh, that's right. You said, oh, you should keep going with that though. That's a really nice
I need a shawl that goes with everything.
Yeah. And this will.
I haven't knit a shawl in donkey's years, so.
It's a great gray because it has some brown in it, and yet, so it's one of those, when you put it next to brown, it looks gray, and when you put it next to gray, it looks brown.
Really the last word in neutral. I mean, I love the depth of it. It's got that.
Yeah, and the depth is just gorgeous.
Yeah.
I love that description. The last word in neutral. That's a good marketing phrase.
Write it down.
I'll tell Michelle.
All your yarns are like that, though.
I like them.
Yeah.
So a few news items are our Heartland Yarn Adventure begins next week, next Friday, I think. For those who live in the, kind of 5-state geographical area, our shop will be open every single day during the Heartland Yarn Adventure, which I think is 9 or 10 days long, for 5 or 6 hours during that time per day. And we welcome anyone who's planning on doing the tour. Please stop and see us. It'll be fun. And then after that, during the first week of August, we're starting our Rhinebeck sweater knit along, you guys. I know, I can't believe it's that time already. But and with it, of course, there'll be some new things coming, surprises, and so keep your eyes peeled for that. And before we meet again in September, we will begin the Yarn Discovery Tour, which is another yarn crawl that takes place in Northeast Ohio over a 3-week period. So there's plenty of time to travel to see us during that. And that has extra perks with it. Whenever you buy a passport, you get a project bag and a stitch marker. And then when you come to the shop, or when you shop online with us and you spend $10, you get a free pattern, a featured free pattern, and some other goodies, raffle tickets and stuff like that. So keep those events in mind. And what else? We'll be back together in September, probably around the 3rd week, probably the day that the Yarn Discovery Tour ends, which is something like the 23rd of September. We'll be doing this again.
Okay.
And we have a special, I'm really looking forward to the September yarn. It's delightful. So
Well, unlike all the other ones, yeah.
Right.
You're such an enabler, Anne, I tell you.
That one surprised and pleased me to no end. I can't wait to share it with you. So with that, I'm done. But again, if anybody has anything else they want to ask or say, now's the time. This is your time. So go for it. I'm just going to check the chat too. Oh gosh, somebody said they had to wash their skein right away because their wool wash exploded in the we're sorry if that caused you a very great inconvenience and you would like to exchange it for a fresh skein, please contact us about doing that. We'll be happy to make that happen. I'm sorry. Who was that? Somebody named C. Was it you? C.E. Collins?
You and me. But
Oh,
look, it's turned out nice and fluffy and pretty though.
it does. It blooms a lot.
It's
So
it's
look at that.
delightful.
Hers is so fluffy.
Yeah.
Very nice. And because it does bloom a lot. It blooms similarly to even, not quite like mohair, but it has those long tendrils. So when it blooms, the fibers can be sticky and catchy. And that's why the pre-wash skein is kind of nice because it's easier to handle. Like it won't catch on itself as much when you knit with it. But if you want to wash it, you can. If you just can't wait to see what it's like when it's washed, go for it.
Would this work for something like romance novel? Like
Yes. I think you should swatch because romance novel was designed with a sport weight and this is a fingering weight. However, we did knit the romance novel with the very lightweight Shetland sport and it worked fine. So I would, do your swatch and see what you think. It's
Oh.
definitely very blockable because a yarn like this, once you block it, and especially if you steam block it, it's not going to shrink back because it doesn't have the elasticity that something like merino has. So once you block it, it's going to keep its shape really, really well. So with something like the romance novel where you're substituting this lighter weight yarn in, if you do have to block it to get the right gauge, you don't have to worry that you'll lose that shape later on.
Okay, great.
And it might even be to your advantage to block it out because the long wool won't droop and grow that way. You'll know what it is from the outset. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thanks.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Yeah, Anne, I've got a question.
Okay.
With the little sample that you sent, the wool wash, it says that it removes the lanolin. Could you educate me a little bit on,
Is it the I'm sorry, the power scour?
no, I've got the Beyond Clean.
Oh, okay.
What, I mean, is lanolin not a good thing to have in your yarn? Could you
Well, it is, but
little about that?
let me just grab it. Let me just read.
It says no harsh ingredients and it removes lanolin.
This one doesn't say that. It says it removes odors and soils, rinses easily, leaves no residue. Now yellowing. Now, I'm looking to see if there's anything like that. I think what they mean by that, and probably that might even be text that came off of the Power Scour labeling. It might be a mislabeling on their part because it's not on the bottle version of the soap. And it might have come from the Power Scour where they use that to remove excess lanolin. You know, the caked on lanolin it's grease, and it can be very hard and greasy on wool when it comes off the sheep, as you know. So Power Scour they use to really clean the wool. I don't think with this it's something you have to worry about. It's not a detergent, and it doesn't strip the fiber completely of lanolin. And I do think that might be a mislabeling because it's not on the bottle version of the label.
Okay. So I mean, other than that, I always thought it was a good thing to have a little bit of lanolin in your yarn.
It definitely is. And it is the thing that it's emollient, so it captures moisture within the fiber and seals it in. So it acts like a shield on the fiber to keep it from becoming brittle and dry. And you don't want all the lanolin to come out. But I guess what I was trying to say is I think that might be a stray piece of information that came from a different label of their product line because it doesn't appear on the bottle version of the label. And I'm thinking that the reason it's there is that they might use the same label on the Power Scour pouches, which Power Scour is intended to clean the majority of lanolin from the fiber. It's used on dirty wool, sheep dirty wool, to get it clean enough to use as yarn, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
And I don't think any of their products will completely strip the fiber. They're not detergent products, they're soaps. So they won't ever completely strip the fiber of grease. And the Beyond it started out as their baby line, but it's really turned into their eco-friendly line, because why have scent and other things in your wool soap that you don't need?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the scent it's okay, but the scented version of their soap is okay, but I just as soon have unscented myself. I like the sheepy smell of the wool.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Anybody else? And that little pouch, I can usually get several sweater washings out of one little pouch. You just need like a little squirt in your water to wash a whole sweater. It's very powerful. And it does say that it is a laundry concentrate, so you really don't need very much.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else? I keep saying that and then interrupting. Well, if no one else has any questions or comments, I'm going to close and look forward to seeing you in our shop or in the knit along or next time we do Barn Box.